Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. This is my monthly compendium of case reports for the month of May 2021. Case files number 118 to 141. Case file number 118, written by Millennia Productions. Two experiences to defy our sense of reality. I've been a reader of these glitch stories for a long time now, but never have actually wrote any of my own down. These are some of my short true glitch experiences that have happened in my life so far. First, I'll start with one that's been stuck with me since 2011. This might sound crazy, but since then, reality just hasn't felt the same for me. It's hard to explain, but I'll try to explain to the best of my ability. Before 2011, everything felt more real, like I could focus on things, and it really felt like real life, if that makes any sense. But then in the beginning of 2011, when I was 13, me, my dad, and brother went for an off-road bike ride through the woods near where I live. There was snow at the time, and everything seemed normal until like halfway through the bike ride. I suddenly felt like I was in a dream, as if things didn't feel real, and I couldn't focus on what was going on around me as much as I used to. I can't remember much else about the trip, but I know that feeling kept sticking with me, even weeks later, and it never went away. It bothered me so much I told my dad about it. Then to my surprise, he says he's had the same feeling since the start of that year. Since then, the feeling of being in a dream and feeling like things are not real has stuck with me to this very day. I'm now 23 and I've learned to live with it, and now it's just part of my reality. But I still remember that real feeling from before 2011. There's another strange thing about this. Again, this might sound crazy, but when I stare into mirrors, that real and more focused feeling from before 2011 comes back. But then I look away and it's gone, and this world I'm in doesn't feel like it's my reality. I saw another post about a thing like this, and one person described it as a waking feeling when looking into a mirror, and that's exactly what I feel. The second one is a more noticeable glitch that happened to me. When I was in my last years of school, maybe 2014, I was in class and suddenly all the lights in the room and from the sun just went out. It was only for less than a second, but it was noticeable because everything suddenly went pitch black. After this happened, I noticed everyone in the room and the teacher is now more quiet and making less noise. I have a weird feeling come over me, like things are not right or like reality changed. I didn't mention this to anyone, but as I'm thinking about it, the teacher said to the class something along the lines of, "Does anyone else feel like something isn't right?" This confirmed that the feeling I felt wasn't just me. This sudden darkness also happened to me other times too, like one day I was on my own in my house, and the same sudden pitch blackness and all light and sun going out happened for less than a second. I think in total this has happened to me 3 or 4 times in my life, but I can't really remember the rest. I would like to hear if anyone else has had a similar feeling from what I've had since 2011, and would like to know anyone else's thoughts on this. Feel free to ask any questions, and thanks. Case notes, file number 118. My first thought after reading this is of the feeling when you look into a mirror. Just a few cases ago, there was a story of a woman who rented a home, but the landlord didn't want the mirrors taken down. It's not clear if this was a curse or if spirits were harnessed through it, but most do agree though. Mirrors are either windows into our own inner essence, or perhaps into other worlds. Maybe even you crossed over to another universe back in 2011, and when you look into a mirror, you get a sense of the you in your originating universe calling to your soul. Something like that. Millennia Productions responded briefly, saying, "I remember that glitch story that reminded me of my own experiences. I think your theory could definitely be possible. That is how I feel when I stare into mirrors now." Case file number 119, written by Kira Bourne. Her dad passed away, yet comfort was offered from an unknown source. So I'm currently 18 and my father died in September 2020 due to a heart attack. We had a very strange relationship. He was an alcoholic. He had to leave our house because of one of his episodes in which he was very violent with me and my mom. Since then, He lived far away with his mother, and we tried to fix the relationship, but we couldn't. He was very aggressive with me, and I needed some time to clear my mind. So we stopped talking, and suddenly, he died. I attended his funeral with my boyfriend. My father's side of the family didn't want to see my mother, so she had to stay at home. All that side of the family hated me and my mom for unknown reasons since I was born, so I was in a very hostile place, in a very depressive situation. Some of them even insulted me and said hurtful things to me at the freaking funeral of my dead father, who I loved despite everything. Due to the circumstances, I was hopeless, crying outside the church with my boyfriend by my side. Suddenly, a random woman appeared. She wasn't there before, and she wasn't part of my family. I didn't see her anywhere. And the conversation goes like this. "Are you the daughter of Thomas?" Not my real father's name, just an example. "Yes." I want to say this before anyone told you hurtful things and mess with your head. I mean, the normal situation in a funeral is that everybody tries to comfort everybody. So how did she know that people were being mean to me? "Your father loved you and he wanted to fix everything with you too. I was with him at every moment in his daily life, and he told me everything. He loved you so much." And it continued like that for a bit. But then my father's friends approached me and started to comfort me as they could. The woman disappeared and never showed again. He was incinerated and she didn't appear at the ceremony. They were friends, so she's supposed to know about the ceremony. Also, they talked about the ceremony, which was in 7 days after the funeral. She must have heard of it. His friend never mentioned that woman at any moment. They didn't know her, nobody knew. So it was kind of, I don't know, but her words really comforted me and helped me to confront his death. I remember the words of that mystery woman ever since I heard them. Case notes, file number 119. So my gut instinct on this is a reaper. Perhaps the one that facilitated the crossing of your dead father. I don't know what the rules are exactly regarding how they're able to interact with those still alive, but it seems to be the most likely case. From my perspective, what we describe as reapers or angels could be server mods of the simulation. If a crossing into another universe isn't possible, every copy of yourself passed away in all universes, then you wake up in the real world, perhaps to go back in with a blank memory, sort of reincarnation. An exciting thought to be sure. Though a more mundane possibility is it's just a distant relative that forgot about the incineration ceremony, but still knew you and knew how much that side of the family hated you. Either way, I'm glad she was able to offer you comfort when you most needed it. Case file number 120, written by Royal Rot. A man, there he stands, devoid of a face, he occupies no one place. About 3 or 4 years ago, sometime in the summer, I was driving home after visiting a friend for some gossip talk. It was around 3 a.m. The drive would be about 15 minutes, and I had made this trip countless times. I left my friend's house, and as I was making a bit of a walk to my car, I noticed a figure standing across a large 6-lane road between us. It definitely caught my attention, but I refused to make eye contact, and I just got in my car and left. I made my U-turn and would pass right by the figure. It only took me a few short seconds to make this turn as well, and I was curious. Within that time frame, the figure was gone. I grew up with childhood schizophrenia, so this occurrence didn't frighten or bother me, and I wrote it off in my brain as a simple trick on my mind. As I drove, I only had a straight shot until I got home for an easy while. I turned on some music and stayed in the left lane. Pausing for a stoplight, my eyes wandered and I noticed the same figure. He was standing on the sidewalk, staring at me. Or so it felt he was staring at me. I couldn't decipher a face no matter how long I stared. I began doing reality checks and other mental health exercises, but they didn't falter the figure's countenance, as they normally would. It wasn't until the light turned green and I drove on, checking in my rearview mirror for him, that he had vanished again. I became much more aware at this point, keeping my eyes scanning the road and sidewalks as I focused on getting to my destination. I saw him again, but this time, he was standing in the bicycle lane by the sidewalk. I passed him. I was wildly curious about why I was seeing this. already making a mental note to talk with my therapist about this occurrence once getting home, marking it off as a lapse in my mental health. There he was again. He was closer. He stood in the left portion of the right-hand lane, in the middle of the street. He never moved, never breathed, nothing. It just appeared that he remained staring in my direction as if expecting me. I passed him. I was almost halfway home, making a mental note and being glad in my mind about it, before a very enormous, strange, and uncomfortable feeling filled my stomach. It was a feeling of both disgust and of fear. I quickly scanned everywhere around me for him. Then I saw him. He was suddenly right there, right in front of my car, and I was approaching rapidly. I slammed on my brakes and gripped my steering wheel tightly. My car halted with a heavy lurch, my seatbelt locking tight and my head flinging forward. I was certain anyone who saw me would think I'm insane. But what had happened was nowhere near what I expected. Within seconds of stepping down on my brakes, a car with all of its lights off rolled out backwards directly in front of me from the mouth of one of the reservoirs that was off to the side of the road. Two real men ran after the car and grabbed it, forcing it to stop its roll right in front of me. One was a gangly but taller man with sunken face and harsh beady eyes. The other was a bit thicker, with a torn shirt and a beanie on. My headlights illuminated the interior of the front seats, and the two other men stared holes into me as they also realized the situation. My breath was caught in my throat when I noticed another male slumped over the steering wheel of the car, unmoving. His face was pointing downwards. He had very short hair, and his seatbelt was nearly dangling him against the wheel. They saw that I noticed him, and I did my best to tear my stare away from him. The two men pushed the car out from in front of me, and the second I had any clearance, I sped off like a bat out of hell. As I was driving away, I constantly checked my rearview mirror for when they would stop pushing the car. They didn't. They pushed that car straight into the reservoir. I heard a nasty scraping sound and just did not look back. I immediately pulled off the main road and got myself home using the neighboring streets. I wasn't sure if those men would come after me or not, and I hoped to God that they wouldn't. I got myself home, finally, exited my car, and had the police on the phone to report what I saw. There the dark figure stood, across the street from me again, staring darts into my soul. I ignored him and hurried inside. The moment I got in, I locked every door and tightly shut every window. About an hour after calling the police, I heard nearly 6 different police sirens start up and fade far into the distance. I don't know what I saw, but what I do know is if that dark shadowy figure never stopped in front of my car, I would have slammed into that darkened car and those two men in that exact second. I told my therapist later what I had experienced, and she said she didn't know exactly what to make of it. I had never seen a figure like that before. Looking at him was like looking at a floater in your eye. I just couldn't see him. I still think about this experience every time I pass that reservoir. I always have an urge to call the police to follow up, but I never feel as though they'd tell me any details. It haunts me, especially the slumped man. Case notes, file number 120. I think there are 2 clear possible explanations here. The first, this man was a spirit of whoever died or was killed in that car that you nearly slammed into. Although, by your description, he doesn't look like this figure that was appearing to you, so maybe not. If it was, he was trying to warn you of the danger and also hoping you'd contact the authorities to seek a form of justice for him. Now, how he'd have known the car would roll out at precisely that moment, I'm not sure. And hell, was he even dead at the time? I don't know. Would spirits have that greater perception of time than we do when we're alive? Not a thought I've pondered on too much. My instincts, though, actually suggest that this was a reaper. It wasn't your time yet, so he appeared to you, but not through sight, directly in your mind. I think this is why your brain was struggling to process him, because you're not meant to see him, and you weren't, not with your eyes anyhow. Did you have a headache after this experience? Royal Rot responded briefly, saying, I got a bit of a cold after this happened actually, and a headache too. I'm a bit of a germaphobe, so I don't get ill very often. Could say the illness was from anything, honestly. Very interesting though. And I responded quickly too, saying, I thought you might have, just a hunch, but obviously this isn't how our brains are designed to process information, so it might have jumbled things up for you at least a little bit. Case file number 121, written by Kawai Kidney. A signal, a mind, made for a life, oh so divined. Hey guys, Lurker here, wondering if anyone has experienced anything similar to this. I will often think about an event or person or item, and they will happen, appear, or reach out to me. These thoughts always have the same feeling to them. It's as if they're coming into my mind, not actively thinking of them. Almost like a radio receiving a signal. My most recent example, for the past several weeks, maybe months, I have had the intense thought come into me that a car will crash into my window. To be fair, these thoughts have happened before. I have very violent and overtaking intrusive thoughts. Too much to delve into though. However, that particular image of the car crashing into my house has never been so persistent. It's usually planes crashing down in my house or bombs. That thought is so intense and can happen multiple times daily, has happened for years straight. Anyways, I just couldn't shake this feeling, or thought, and the fear bundled with it. Then suddenly, me and my boyfriend were driving to Walmart, and on our usual route still in the suburbs, I see a cop car ahead. I keep my eyes glued and see nothing other than a car plastered into the side of a house. It felt like a part of my mind clicked, like, aha, I haven't had that thought since, which is super rare for persistent intrusive thoughts. That was an extreme case. I often think of people, the thought will come into me almost like a wave. They will text me that same day, reach out somehow. It happens nearly without fail. I think of a friend I haven't seen since graduation while at work, and not an hour later, he walks past me at my job and we end up rekindling. I don't think it's me manifesting, because I can't will people to reach out to me. The thoughts have to come naturally, and it's almost a strange sense of letting go and the thought overtaking my mind. It's not invasive whatsoever, and I nearly never notice that feeling because it's just so natural, a part of me. But when I think back, it's definitely not a normal feeling. I sound like a weirdo right now, but this is the best way I can describe it. This happens so often, it just feels like I'm glancing into the future just a little. I never feel uncomfortable or bad when these things happen. It always feels just like gentle affirmation for something good. No clue. Edit. This got way more traction than I was expecting, and it's made me feel a little bit more at peace. Thank you. Case notes. File number 121. This must be such a curious life to live. But as you describe it, it sort of seems like a signal transmitted and interpreted by your brain. I wonder why you specifically. Perhaps these signals, this information is out there, everywhere, just like cell towers constantly beaming information omnidirectionally from towers. But without a specific SIM card, you can't access it. It's conceivable that some people's brains are wired in a way to receive those signals. Of course, then the real question is, where are they coming from? And what kind of signal are they? And especially if they're from the future, well, how is that possible? Case file number 122, written by Such Sloth. Man, alien, or beast, whatever it was, made for a night unleashed. I live in Georgia, the state, in a rural town not too far from a major city. There's a set of woods that's behind our house and it divides two neighborhoods. It's about a mile wide, if that. Strange occurrences have always surrounded these woods. Small things like random trash, tarps, etc. I should mention it's more swampy marsh than woods, so it makes camping in there impossible. One night I was taking our dog out. He stays in the back half of the house due to him not liking the other dogs. I took him out the side door and walked around the house to the fence. For some reason, when we left the house, he was absolutely terrified. He didn't want to go out, very unusual for a dog who's quick to snatch someone's soul if prompted. Not thinking about it, we pushed onward. After he tinkled, we walked back. This is when I noticed it, or rather heard it, crunching of leaves. At first, I thought it was one of our dozen cats on the property, until I realized it was matching my steps. If I walked, you could hear it walking. If I stopped, it too stopped. There's a small clearing between the woods where one of the sheds is. That's when we saw it. My dog was first to see something, and then I saw I don't really know, creature? It was taller than the shed, so maybe a good 8 feet tall, and it darted across the clearing at a crazy fast speed. My dog, who, again, isn't scared of anything, bolted so fast I dropped his leash and he ran to the door whining. I was quickly behind him. Once we were inside, I quickly bolted the door and ran to tell my girlfriend what happened. She immediately wanted to investigate, saying it's probably a woodland creature. Armed with 2 flashlights, we went out the front door. As we walked towards the wood line, we could hear something moving around. It sounded maybe 200 yards away. As we scanned with our flashlights, we saw nothing but kept hearing it. Then we heard it get closer and closer until it was maybe 20 feet away. Still nothing, no eyes, not even an animal call, just rustling. My girlfriend, now scared, heads for the house. I decided to check with the neighbors to see if maybe one of their many dogs got out. When I arrived at his house, my neighbor, who we'll call Dave, explained that all his dogs were accounted for. Curious though he was, he also came to investigate. This is when I noticed that whatever this thing was followed me along the woodline to Dave's house and was now behind Dave's house. Gun in hand, we went into his backyard scanning for something. We could hear it rustling or maybe running, about 100 yards away in thick, swampy woods. Far too thick for a person to walk in, let alone run in. Then it stopped. It was dead silent. Scanning on the edge, we hear and see nothing. And then, bam! All of a sudden, it was 5 feet in front of us, sprinting at me. It slammed the fence so hard it rocked it back and forth. Dave, now scared out of his mind, shot randomly at, well, nothing. We never saw it, never heard it get close to us. Again, as I mentioned, the woods are thick, too thick to run in, so what the hell teleported silently in front of us and then slammed the gate? Spooked, we were about to run. Then we heard it. It was human in nature, but not English. It sounded almost alien-like, not a known language. Dave, a hunter for the last 40 years, still to this day can't explain what that was. Anyway, after we heard that, we bolted. He covered me and I ran to my house. Not 10 minutes later, we both heard a loud explosion coming from the woods. It shook our houses and flickered our power. I ran outside to see what it was, and of course, nothing. But when Dave came out and confirmed he felt the same thing, we were both once again terrified. Moments later, a few strangers from the neighborhood came driving down our cul-de-sac, and they all agreed the blast sound they heard came from behind our house. 911 was called, and the 2 police officers interviewed us separately. Our stories matched. The responding officers refused to go anywhere near those woods. They took the report and left. To this day, we're still not sure what that encounter was. Also, Dave doesn't go outside at night anymore. It spooked him that bad. And remember, he's a seasoned hunter. Update. I understand I need to clarify something. The reason I say it's about 8 feet tall is because when I saw something dart past the clearing, all I saw was a light being blocked out from touching the shed. It blocked the light all the way past the top. It was fast, like a flicker, but I can confirm that it was something as my dog saw it too. Case notes, file number 122. So the author mentioned aliens, as in an alien language. A man of culture, I see. But in all seriousness, this must have been scary as hell. Honestly, I don't blame those 2 cops for not wanting to explore the backwoods. Who the hell would? Maybe with an army, the Mist style, equipped with flamethrowers. Maybe then, and maybe not. The really strange part, of course, is what on earth could cause the explosion too? There's nothing out in those woods, it's only a mile long, right? The only thing I can think of is maybe somehow an exposed gas line was sparked, but that doesn't really make sense either. If there's even a gas line running through those woods, and how would it get exposed right in that moment? And then what would cause a spark to ignite it? Case file number 123. written by Crispy Milk 69. His canine buddy blocked by a door. Minutes later, this was no snore. This happened a couple months ago. So I have 5 dogs. One of them, we like to call her the baby of the house. She's this sweet tiny little mutt who rolls over at the slightest raise of your voice. Anyways, I was leaving the house to go back to work. I always make sure she's inside before leaving. I know for a fact she went inside when I left, because I stuck my foot in front of her and sort of kept her in place while I slipped through the door and shut it, like I usually do. Again, I want to reiterate, she was inside the house because I watched her start to walk away from the front door as I was closing it. I always make sure she's inside because I don't want her getting chewed up by any of the bigger dogs that roam around. I even looked around and made sure I didn't leave any other dogs outside. Went to my car, forgot something, turned the corner to go back inside, and there she was. She was just sitting in front of the door, outside, looking at me, and she was wagging her tail. Or nub, since she's a mutt and doesn't really have a tail, like she had been waiting on me to let her inside. At first, I thought maybe somebody had broken in or something. But the door was locked, back door is completely blocked by a bookshelf, windows were locked, no doggy doors, nobody else was home, and no way for her to have gotten outside. This was the only time this has happened. I live in a fairly small house. I know every nook and cranny, and there's no hidden hole in the wall or anything. Maybe I just missed something, but I've been royally confused ever since. Case notes, file number 123. Honestly, it's such a cool little glitch, since no one was hurt or even really scared. But it must drive your mind completely crazy, doesn't it? I wonder if maybe a window was open, although you say they were all locked. A stretch, I suppose. I can't imagine any way for her to have gotten outside, given your description. Did she behave the same after? No marks or injuries at all? Crispy Milk 69 responded to my comment briefly, saying, "There was no window open and no doors open. She behaved the exact same way she always does. Just chill and wags her tail when I come towards her." Furthering my thoughts, all I can say is this one really baffles me. It's a tiny glitch, but it just shouldn't be possible. Case file number 124, written by Round Management 597. Siblings connected by fate. Their cord came back 5 years late. It was a typical school night back in high school. I'm the youngest sibling. I have 2 older brothers, and at that time, I lived with my whole family, mom and dad included. My grandparents are wealthy, so every once in a while, we would meet them for dinner at their country club 15 minutes from my house. With everyone being busy on a weekday, it was normal for us to take more than one car, whatever was the most convenient way for us to get there on time to meet for dinner. This time, specifically, I went with just my older brother to the country club in his 2006-2007 Toyota Camry that my grandparents bought for him when he got his license, which was super generous as my family couldn't afford to get him one. We are very thankful for them as they have helped us out a lot over the years. I can't remember exactly which year the car is, but that's not important. What is important though is that the car does not have Bluetooth. Therefore, it required an auxiliary cord to play music from our phones. Everything about this glitch is so vivid. We get to dinner and everything is normal. We were playing music on the way to dinner. We get back to the car after dinner. The sun had gone down. However, now the black auxiliary cord he'd been using the whole year was gone. I remember searching the car, moving the seat back and forth, asked him if he's sure he's locked the car, and he was. It also would be such a weird thing to take by itself. My brother actually being into this kind of glitch stuff like I am, we marked it down as a glitch at the time. Couldn't explain where it went, and it couldn't have gone missing. We moved on with our lives and thought, it's pretty cool and funny, but weird that it just went missing randomly, you know? Now audience, I know what you're thinking. There are a million stories of things just going missing unexplainably on here, but this is where it gets twisted. Fast forward probably 5 years to last year, 2019-2020, prior to the virus. I was a freshman in college. My fraternity had a parents' weekend and both my parents couldn't make it, so I flew out to see my brother that weekend in his new home in Texas. For reference, he moved from New York, where we grew up, after he graduated college for a job, and I'm in Arizona for college, so it was not far or anything. I remember wanting in and out, so we went to the parking garage in his new apartment complex where, funny enough, he keeps the exact same car he has had since he was a senior in high school, the blue 2007 Toyota Camry that my grandparents got him. We finally get to the car. I live in New York when I'm not at school, so it was cool to see it again. It had been a few years, and I cannot make this up. When we stepped foot in the car, the exact same black auxiliary cord from 5 years before that we lost together that one night was in his car. Now I know what you're all gonna think. Obviously, he just got a new one, and it just so happened to look the same. When we looked at each other to discuss, the first thing he did was accuse me of pranking him. I know my brother so well. He wouldn't keep this gig up. It's not worth it. That auxiliary cord reappeared 5 years later when we got into his car together and had both of us in shock. It felt like some weird game someone was playing with us. I can't express enough that it was not an Apple cord. It was the same black cord that I remember using on that night of dinner when it went missing. This story is so legitimately true, it's just unnerving to me because I can't properly convey that to other people. As the title says, this unfolded over the course of 5 years, and I'm so glad that I had my brother there to experience it with me. The reason I added this little part at the end is because when I read the stories on here, I like to confirm that they are true, otherwise they're worth nothing. Case notes, file number 124. So my thought is, was the cord plugged into the car or just strewn about on the dashboard? Without it reappearing, it's within the realm of possibility that it was just stolen those 5 years ago, although you do say your brother locked the car. And yeah, it would be such a weird thing to steal, just a headphone cord. But with it returning, especially in the exact same way it disappeared in, strikes me more as the out-of-phase phenomena, where people or objects can lose connectivity to reality. They phase out, although with the exception that they still appear to be bound by the gravity of the planet and its relative motion. Otherwise, they'd reappear in empty space, millions of miles from Earth. Usually they reappear after a few minutes or hours, though. But who's to say it can't last for years? Case file number 125, written by SNL 1819. Pizza and joy in the air, but now a duplicate, she will declare. So I work at a fast food place, one of the big named franchises. I was the closing manager tonight. On April 20th, 2021, it was just me and my closing driver. My driver was on a delivery and an order popped up on the screen. It was an order placed on the web, so I didn't talk to anyone. I put the 2 pizzas and the side in the oven and go to wait by the cutting station for the food to come out. While I'm waiting, a silver bar falls onto the ground back in the dishwashing area. The silver bars separate the Lexans in containers on our make line, like a buffer if you will. Anyways, it falls. Again, no one is in the store except for me, so it freaked me the hell out. It was very loud. I walk back in the general direction and turn the corner. There's the bar just sitting on the floor. I even took a video after it fell and sent it to my wife because I was tripping out. I didn't pick it up or touch it at all, and just walked back to the cutting station to box up the odor. You know, cleanliness and all. Well, the weird thing is, when I went back to the cut station, I boxed up the side and 1 thin crust pizza. At this point, my driver walks in the front door of the store, and I turn around to grab the original crust pizza. I cut it and tell him his delivery is up and ready to go. Then, I saw another pizza coming out of the oven. I only put in that 1 order, 2 pizzas and 1 side, but here is somehow a random 3rd pizza. And it was a duplicate of the thin crust pizza. I don't know why, but I initially thought that it was my driver that made it. He couldn't have, he just came back while I was boxing up this order. So I asked him. I don't know why, because I knew the answer, but I was again freaked out. So I asked if he made the pizza and he chuckled and said no, he just got back to the store. So I cut the pizza, then threw it away. I know, I'm weird. It's just a habit to cut a pizza when it comes out of the oven. but neither of us wanted to eat it since we didn't know how it appeared there. It tripped me out. He left for his delivery, and I was on edge for the rest of the night. I don't know what happened. Maybe it was a crossover universe when the silver bar fell, and it triggered something. I have no clue. All I know is I've been at this pizza company for 10 years, this store in particular for 3, and this has never happened before. Case notes, file number 125. Okay, so very important. I'm reading the comments here, and I see that the duplicate mystery pizza had pineapple on it. Well, that settles it. It was demons responsible for this. The only possible explanation. Joking aside, that is a mind warp indeed. It's not like this could be a pizza you forgot from hours ago that have been burnt to cinders and charcoal. You say that this thin crust was the same configuration as the order's thin crust, the same ingredients, so a proper duplicate. Obviously there's no way you just accidentally made 2 pizzas. Even with years of experience, making a pizza is still an involved enough process. I know, I've tried. Disappearing and reappearing objects, that's common, but materializing entirely new matter from nowhere, that's a different ballgame entirely. The only conceivable explanation is that you blacked out and made a second pizza without realizing it. Like your memory was wiped out for those few minutes. Perhaps this was somehow triggered by the silver bar falling down. I know hypnotists use audio cues to wake people up. Then the bar falling would be you waking up, not being put under. Now, why someone would have hypnotized you to make a pizza that they didn't collect, I really don't know. Anywho, total speculation, but that's the fun part. Case file number 126, written by Spicy Marge, 19, traveling through time and space, only to wind up in the same place. First time posting here. I read the flowchart and I think this fits, so here goes. I went grocery shopping today, and the supermarket I went to didn't have one, but very important, ingredient I needed for dinner. So once I was done, I drove to another supermarket down the road. As I walked toward the aisle I needed, I saw an older man looking at me, probably about 65 years old. I'm 26 for reference. Anyway, I looked at him briefly and immediately thought he looked like a much older version of my husband, who is 30. I didn't think much of it and began walking down the aisle. As I got to the ingredient I was after, there was a woman standing in exactly the same spot. She had blonde hair, was exactly my height, and looked like an older version of me, again about 65. Then I noticed we had the exact same handbag. It's a Louis Vuitton handbag that was given to me by an aunt I'm very close to. The woman looked at me, and I swear to you, she slightly smirked before walking away. I stared back at her as she walked away before I heard a voice behind me call my name. I turned and it was the old man who looked like my husband. I then looked towards the woman and she started walking towards him. We had the same name, the same bag, and we looked so similar, albeit the age gap. It was the most bizarre experience and I can't understand what happened. Could it be possible that I encountered an older version of myself and my husband, and what does that even mean? Case notes, file number 126. So time travel is theoretically possible to the past, yet it creates many paradoxes. This is why I prefer the many worlds theory. Traveling to the past creates a new universe copy that your time-traveling self now occupies. Kill your parents, and the parents that birthed you still exist in the original universe's timeline, so then you avoid paradoxes. Rather, I think your mind somehow conjured them up, a long-term foresight ability. Not of events, but of who you and your husband will become. Though if they interacted with the world, I suppose that would prove that they're more than just visions in your mind conjured. If they were you from a different timeline, though, then it would have no bearing on their original starting point, their original universe. I don't know what they would be doing here. Why would they just appear to themselves as they were shopping all those decades ago? Wouldn't really make any sense. Case file number 127, written by OK Lavishness 0418. A creature unknown with a piercing cry to chill the bone. My family is from Guatemala. My parents grew up in a town close to the pyramids of Tikal in a very mountainous area. In 1976, my parents being around 10 or 12 years old, there was a horrible earthquake that killed and injured hundreds of thousands of people. My dad was even trapped for days under the rubble of his home before being rescued. It's a horrible memory for them. I have many family members with similar stories. That isn't the paranormal tale though, but events leading to it were. This is a story as told to me by my parents. About a year later, maybe a little more, strange things started to happen in the forestry mountains near their town. It started with the cries. Every night something would start crying in the mountains. At first they thought it was possibly a wild cat in heat. However, they started to realize that this sound could be heard from everywhere in the town. My mom said it sounded like a man wailing in pain or anguish. It happened every single night around the same time and lasted sometimes for hours. A few months later, the sightings started. It started with a large bird flying over the town and mountains. Then a large humanoid creature was seen in the mountains. My mom described it as kind of like Bigfoot, only it was completely white and less hairy. The people who crossed its path said its eyes were very pale, and the noise they heard at night sounded the same as the cry it would emit when spotted. An anguished, horrified sound. Almost exactly a year after the first sound started, the earthquake hit and my parents' town, being close to the epicenter, suffered great damages. Many people died, were injured, or became homeless. The wails, however, completely stopped after the earthquake. My mom often ponders if it was some sort of angel coming to warn us of the coming disaster, and it left having been unable to be understood. My dad believes that whatever it was probably died just like many others, falling victim to the earthquake. Case notes, file number 127. So this strikes me as an omen of danger and death. There's no accident here that it vanished after the earthquake. Somehow, whatever it was, it knew what was coming and wanted to warn the humans in the town. Perhaps some yet undiscovered wild animal. Maybe a reaper, even, taking form to prevent mass death. Though if that's the case, it appears they were unsuccessful. It's said that humans are not able to perceive angels, not in their true form, and in doing so they would go mad. Case file number 128, written by Plutonian Babe. Love is in the air, but all she has is a sim and a prayer. This one sounds childish, but I'd really like to get your insights, and I know I'm not the only one with this kind of experience. In November 2020, my ex and I parted ways for good, and I was both aggravated and upset. I had created him as my sim future husband, and I decided to change him, to forget about him. I wanted my new husband to be totally different. Opposite skin color, opposite style, and especially gray hair in order to be really sure that he'd be around my age. I am 46, and my ex and I broke up essentially because of a huge age gap, which was excruciating for both of us. I chose a messy hairstyle, pretty formal black clothes, big blue eyes, and other specific physical traits. I wanted him to play the guitar, and I built him a fancy recording studio. I also wanted him to have a decent career, and made him work at the office. Just a few days later, my girlfriend was coming over, and she asked me if she could come with 2 friends from another part of the country, because she was hanging out with them sooner that day. So I welcomed them without knowing them. I kid you not, when I went and opened the front door for them, there he was. My sim husband. He locked into my eyes instantly through the window with an inquisitive look, and when he came in, he said, "Do I know you? It looks like we've already met." My answer was, "Yes, you're my sim husband." What an icebreaker. No need to mention that he matches every characteristic of his virtual version. Job type, playing the guitar in a band. Guess what their dress code was? The gray, messy hair. The big blue eyes, the dad bod, and even the shape of his mouth. We got along perfectly on many levels that night. Laughed a lot, and he mentioned later how fast we clicked and how many common tastes and interests we have, especially in music. Of course, he hit on me pretty heavily a few weeks later. One day, we were chatting at his place and he told me, "Don't forget you created me." He totally got me. This kind of glitch happened to me another time when I created a different fiancé. I know, who looked like another guy I was interested in. I put a beanie on his head with big headphones, as his actual hairstyle was not available. A few days later, I was hanging out with friends and he arrived, with a beanie of the color I chose for him, and his headphones were over it. What the fork happened to me? Case notes, file number 128. So that this happened to you twice is what upgrades it from unlikely coincidence to a mathematical impossibility. My bet is, you'd have met these two men regardless if you played the game or not. This was just a way to convert the information from your brain into a visual medium, so you predicted meeting them. Case file number 129, written by Apprehensive Rip 752. He learned that spirits are real, yet the experience was oh so surreal. I've been wanting to share this story for years. It is easily the most visceral experience I have ever had, and it started with an innocent after-work drink when I was working in London, quite some years back. I'd agreed to meet an old work colleague at a pub on the Strand in London, near Waterloo Bridge. I'd never been there before, and the pub was cozy, small. I think it was called the Savoy Tup or Tap. My ex-colleague, let's call him Tim, was there when I arrived, and he managed to get a small table and a couple of seats, tucked into a corner of the pub, besides the bar. We were a bit cramped, but were thankful to be able to sit. After our first pint, Tim went to get another round. That's when I saw her. As impossible as it was, I felt there was suddenly someone standing in the small space between me and the wall. There's no way anyone could have squeezed past without me noticing. They literally would have had to climb over me. I turned around and against the wall there was a young woman, early 20s, staring down at me. I knew she was a ghost. Thing was though, she wasn't see-through at all. I saw her like I saw any other patron in the pub. She was dressed in clothing that I picked to be from the mid to late 80s, a bit goth in style, all black. She said nothing, she was just looking down at me, staring intently. I was frozen in place, just staring back at her. A few moments passed and I spied Tim out of the corner of my eye, beers in hand. I thought perhaps he can see her too. Tim sat and I turned to him, wide-eyed. He put the beers down and said, "What's wrong?" I turned back to the wall and she was gone. I asked, "Did you see anything besides me?" He looked at me strange and replied, "No," and I changed the subject. I hadn't known Tim that well previously, so I didn't want to act weird. Soon enough, it was my shot, and as I got up, I also took the chance to head to the toilet. I recall they were up a flight of stairs, and I remember a really weird feeling in the upstairs toilet as well. I tried to shake it all off so I could enjoy the evening. Heading back to the bar, I ordered, and as the bartender was pouring the beers, I hesitated, but finally asked him something like, "Has there ever been anything weird happen in this pub?" The bartender stopped pouring, looked at me, and asked, "Did you see her upstairs, did you?" I looked back at him. Motioning over to where Tim and I were sitting, I said, "No, she was over there, where I'm sitting. She appeared up against the wall." The bartender replied. "She usually stays up in the bathrooms. That's where most people experience something." Handing the beers over, I was told a story of how a young female bartender in the late 80s had hanged herself in the upstairs toilet of that pub. Case notes, file number 129. I'm reminded of a past story where someone was sleeping in their bed. They were awoken to the image of a woman soaking wet by their bedside. Moments later, she had vanished. But she looked fully formed in the moments that she was there, not translucent at all like you'd expect from a ghost. And by the bedside carpet, it was drenched in real water. So to me it's clear that ghosts can, but don't always appear completely materialized. And often when they do, or maybe always, it's to do with how strong the emotional connection to their history is. The woman appeared wet, as she had no doubt drowned. And in your case, she appeared in the bar where sorrow led her to take her own life. Case file number 130, written by Much Juggernaut 4321. A journal written in with misery. The rest was a mystery. I've been reading this page over the past couple of weeks or so, and never thought I'd even have something to contribute, but this popped into my mind today. Preface: a few years ago in college, I was on a dance team. Every fall, we'd hold auditions and a new girl joined the team. We'll call her Panda, as it's the nickname I have with her currently. She was really nice, but I also didn't think much of it, as she was just an acquaintance at this point. Anyways, I was going through some dark episodes in college, and was journaling it down one day. I remember specifically writing a line like, "I don't want to be here anymore, and I don't know what to do about it." Immediately after writing that, Panda's name popped into my head. It's almost like it was implanted in my head rather than a thought that came from the conscious me. I wrote her name with a question mark after it. I didn't know what to think. It was entirely random to me. I hadn't known her well enough to assume she'd be going through anything. I wasn't sure what made me write her name down after that statement, but I moved along with my journaling. Later that same day, our dance team met at a party and I could tell something was off with her. Based on the weirdness of journaling earlier that day, I felt compelled to pull her aside and ask what's wrong. It turns out she was struggling with self-harm, which I could entirely relate to based on my past. I was taken aback. That was a weird enough coincidence on its own. But what really floored me is when she said the exact sentence I had written down. "I don't want to be here anymore, and I don't know what to do about it." I guess that could be considered a common statement. And I know this isn't the craziest glitch, if that's what it is, but I'm also not someone that expects things like this to happen to me. I know the universe is weird, but my life feels very average and normal. What are the chances I would write something down hours before it was said to me and predict who was going to say it? Ultimately, her and I ended up becoming best friends, and it was that day that made all the difference. Case notes, file number 130. You saved each other. I don't know if this was a glitch or if somehow your minds were synced and connected. Frankly, coincidences do happen all the time. I do lean a little towards it being more mysterious, mainly because she thought the exact same line that you had written down. It could be a coincidence, but it's not very likely. That would be quite the fluke if no other phenomena was involved. I've heard of twins having this kind of bond. The author responded to me saying, "I agree with you. We are both very emotional, but the more we've gotten to know each other, we've realized that our issues are fundamentally different. We are a great support system for each other though." Case file number 131, written by Mean Logic. Invisible to the eye, maybe here to say goodbye. Just a bit of background info. I'm a technology industry professional, currently working on teaching vehicles how to drive themselves. In order for this technology to work, it uses a mix of radar and Lidar to read the world around it, build a 3D representation of what it sees, and then categorize it before mapping it out in real time. Essentially, it constructs the world around it to constantly learn, adapt, and self-navigate from point A to point B and beyond. As a part of this process, we often send out mapping vehicles to pre-map the area and or determine if the area is a viable location for such a vehicle to operate in. A process we typically do at night because there's way less traffic on the road and we have ample time to correct any issues that may occur. Last year, while one of our mapping vehicles was out and about, it happened to enter into a cemetery one evening. We don't map cemeteries, but we will sometimes map the entrance and driveways of some locations in order to provide the vehicle additional options should it run into something we'd rather avoid. For example, road construction, police activity, or an accident. In any case, the vehicle wound up going into the cemetery. A few moments later, the technician watching what the vehicle was picking up goes, "Hey man, are you seeing this?" As I stated, the vehicle will scan and categorize whatever it picks up in its area of operation. I look at the screen and although the vehicle was picking up and categorizing pedestrians in the area, there was no one there to see. Even the categorization was fluctuating from pedestrian to unknown to even animal. we'd see them pop up on the lidar the vehicle was using to scan the area and the trajectory they were headed in at that time, look up the real-time cameras, and nothing. Both of us are natural skeptics, but both of us have also had our experiences with things we couldn't explain, so it's a healthy skepticism. We kept looking for ways to debunk what it was we were seeing, but there was no explanation we could think of. The vehicle was clearly picking up something on its lidar that we just could not see in the cameras. This went on for several minutes, and long enough that we called the others to verify what we were seeing. Whatever the vehicle was picking up that night was something that we just couldn't see with the naked eye. Case notes, file number 131. The system, using radar and Lidar, was detecting something, but you just couldn't see it. I don't know if radar and Lidar are known to detect ghosts. It is a cemetery, so one would think, it must be a spirit then. I mean, it could be. The author responded to me saying, oh, definitely. Headlights were on. All other lights, such as brake lights and turn signals, were working. As I mentioned to someone else, the vehicle and its ability are safe enough that we use these vehicles to drive actual passengers around with no driver in the front seat. They drive themselves completely autonomously. There are, however, technicians like myself who can monitor the vehicle and even take control remotely if necessary, should the vehicle run into an issue it cannot think through on its own. Expanding on my thoughts, all I can say to that is, these automatic cars are tested to such an extent the program has to be so flawless that accidents are almost impossible. So whatever it's picking up, you'd think it's no programming bug. Something was there. Maybe it was just a small animal that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. What do you think? Case file number 132, written by Manic Pixie 89. He walked by, she said. He said, no, you're misled. I had a recent glitch that has been freaking me out for weeks. My husband and I live in a house with just the two of us and a number of pets. The way our floor plan is laid out, you have to go through the kitchen to get to the living room. There's no way out of the living room without passing back through the kitchen either. I was in the kitchen wiping off the counter and tidying things up a bit and getting ready to cook dinner. I looked up and saw my husband walking through the kitchen and going into the living room. My dog, who was watching me clean the kitchen, stood up and followed him into the living room. I started talking to him, telling him some work gossip. When he didn't respond, I set down the paper towel I was using to clean and walked into the living room to see if he heard me. Sometimes he wears noise-canceling headphones around the house, so I assumed that's why he wasn't responding. But when I walked into the living room, he wasn't there. My dog was laying on the couch, but no one else was in the room. I called out my husband's name and he responded from the den, which is on the opposite corner of the main floor, so he would have had to walk right past me to get back there. I went into the den and asked if he had just been in the living room. He looked at me like I was crazy and said he'd been in the den for the last hour. Here's to hoping that the extra glitchy husband will pull his weight and do some chores around the house next time. Case notes, file number 132. So this would be the third story I've read with someone walking into a room, having been seen, only to not be where they should have been. And it's even more peculiar because your dog saw it too, which adds extra gravitas. In the other two stories similar to this, the person who was seen appeared in a different location altogether with no memory of it. The fact your husband didn't notice anything was off, he was just in the den. That is weird. Perhaps some kind of unintentional projection. Case file number 133, written by Hattie T. A house occupied by living and dead, yet it still remains their homestead. Some background on the house. It was built around 1650 near Oxford, England. My parents are pretty well off, so it's a nice house. Pretty big, but not excessive for a small village. And it's right next to a graveyard. As in, we have an outbuilding, which is an old blacksmith's forge, that literally sits on top of the graveyard, and our garden lowers compared to the graveyard wall because the place is so full of bodies. It was originally one house, then split to three with a small cottage, then to two houses, and I live in the slightly bigger one of the houses. The house has been a pub too. We still have a door from when it was. The land dates way back. We even have 2 Roman wells on the property. One covered over by the patio, one full of earth in the garden which had Roman artifacts found surrounding it by some old residents. It is old, so it makes sense that it's haunted, right? My family moved in February of 2015. My dad, my mom, my older sister, and me. We had no idea of any crap in the house at this point. At first, there were some weird vibes, some strange noises, some doors closing on their own, but nothing to freak out about. Apart from in the section of the house no one slept in, our then spare room / study / bathroom in a small upstairs wing of the house. Our printer was kept down there, and whenever my mom sent me to get printouts, I would sprint away as fast as I could, out of fear. I used to cry and protest going down there because it felt so terrible. There was just a thick air of terror. We actually got the village priest in to bless it about a year later. I went to a Christian school, and my mom thought it would put me at ease. Instantly, all bad stopped down that side of the house, and my sister suddenly moved rooms down to it, and her old room became our spare room and instantly got the same thick, heavy air to it. A few months in, was it April, my mom had a strange experience. The corner of the duvet being tugged on, and then a creature crawling up her back. It wasn't sleep paralysis. She'd had that before, and she could move. It was heavy, crawling up her back like a person, and it got to her head and then disappeared. A lady later came around. She heard the house got new owners. She'd lived there in the 1970s and told my mom that she'd had the exact same experience of tugging and crawling, and also that her piano played itself, among a few other weird experiences, before my mom mentioned anything about what she'd experienced, and my mom's heart sank. She didn't tell me anything until a few weeks later I came to her in tears, saying I'd seen a shape walk into the room and then disappear, and have something tug at the duvet and walk up to me in front of my body, and it was definitely not sleep paralysis. That's 3 people having the same experience, give or take how the person is lying, without communicating it. Weird. I can't explain the feeling of it. By this point, we are all aware of some weird crap. We even found chicken bones in the roof of our cellar, which is way older than the rest of the house, possibly like 1500s. We had doors slamming, we had footsteps, but then my dad had an experience too. He has never believed in ghosts. He's lived in old houses for a long time. He's had family friends have terrible experiences with the paranormal. He grew up Catholic, and he didn't believe anything until about January 2016. My mother, sister, and me were all in the kitchen, and he was walking past the spare room and heard shuffling coming from inside. He shouted my mom's name, asking if it was her, and a deep, gravelly voice replied, "Try again." He ran down the stairs white as a sheet. At this point, 2017, everyone had been through something in the house. Shapes would walk past, disembodied footsteps roamed at night, objects moving, watchful eyes on your back, chairs moving, inexplicably ice-cold rooms, pretty typical things for a haunted house that were happening pretty much on the regular. At this point, I made some new friends and started inviting them around. The spare room had a double bed, so that's where we would have slumber parties. I had several friends ask me, "Hey, did you hear knocking on the walls or doors or windows or drawers last night?" Every time they came over, all separated with very similar recounts. I would then relay my stories and watch them turn pale. Fun for me, probably not for them. I had some friends over and we made a point of shutting the door to see if it would open, and it did. We all had trouble sleeping that night. In 2018, I had an exchange student from Germany at school, and my exchange partner slept in the spare room. On the last night of her stay, I had something knock on the slats underneath my bed. It woke me up, but I fell asleep again. It woke me up again a few minutes later, and knocked while I was awake. I left the room and told whatever it was to get the hell out, and it did. I slept fine the rest of the night. It did not like that the German girl was in the spare room. Around this time, our next-door neighbors walked up to us one day and asked if we had our house exorcised because of how terrible things were for them. Heavy footsteps would stomp around their house, disembodied crying of children and playing their glockenspiel in the middle of the night. They were terrified and presumed the increased disturbance was because we had it blessed. We didn't, but at this point the activity did slow. Every now and then, from late 2018 to 2020, we had banging and footsteps and touching and noises. Again, the usual. Nothing nominal, just small, creepy, unexplainable happenings. Lockdown was uneventful until November 2020. We had our kitchen remodeled. The kitchen was kinda remaining from about 30 years ago, so I reckon it really pissed off the ghosts to have it change. They were mostly fine with us in the house now. They knew us. We had lived there for 5 years after all. But our builder, they hated. He worked during the day when me and my sister were at school. My dad at work and my mom, who works from home, would run errands. One day, the builder asked my mom if someone else lived with us. She said no and asked why. He said he heard footsteps in my room, above the kitchen, and doors slamming, and voices and noises during the day that started the moment we were all out of the house. He also heard footsteps walk into the kitchen and stand behind him, thinking it was my mother and striking up conversation, but realizing she was out of the house when she didn't reply, and there was nothing there. Several times he thought someone was there with him and heard them move and breathe when they weren't there. He's a 6'2" burly, muscular firefighter, and he also felt a larger person, bearing in mind everyone in my house is 5'6" to 5'8", and we always hit our heads walking around, leaning over him and looking over his shoulder, feeling them in his space. You know when someone stands next to you, and there being nothing there. Seeing this giant, petrified, was quite funny in honesty, but it's a strange experience. This brings us to present day. Yesterday, I was going out with my mom, shopping. I thought her car started, so I ran into the spare room to look out the window at the driveway to see her car, and the car wasn't started. I shrugged it off and kept looking out the window for a couple of seconds, when I heard shuffling and breathing behind me. I spun around, and on the other side of the double bed was a kid, a young boy about 6, staring at me. He was pale, dark-haired, and dirty. He looked sick and malnourished. He didn't feel scary or mean, he just felt sad, and the room was freezing. I would have thought he was a real kid if he didn't look so out of place. We looked at each other for what felt like a lifetime, but was really 3 seconds, and I sprinted out of the room and yelled for my mom. I relayed the story to my parents and they were horrified. My dad went to look and saw nothing. My mom went upstairs and said there was the same thick, heavy air throughout the whole upstairs. It's like a portal opens up and the house feels so unnaturally wrong and hostile. It's unlike anything I've ever felt before in my life. Seeing it was easily the most scared I've ever been. It reminds me of when my neighbors said they heard children. I'm an atheist, but I slept with a crucifix next to me last night, not taking any chances. So yeah, that's the story of my house and the hauntings. Super creepy, but it doesn't feel malicious. There's spirits, but they don't mean me harm. They're just trapped, I reckon. Hope you enjoyed. Case notes, file number 133. I would say this story speaks for itself. There are entities in your home. I don't know how you managed to stay around, but I guess it is your home, and it's not easy to leave it. I would say though, outside of the try again moment, none of these sound truly malevolent. Like you, I think they're probably just trapped there, but they don't mean you harm. Although the crawler spirit that went up on your mom, that's a bit creepy. But it strikes me more as like a deviant troll than outright malice. Case file number 134, written by Becca Love 3. An unlikely dose of grit took care of those misfits. When I was 15, a drug deal gone bad resulted in a shooting. A man lost his leg and another ended up in jail. My stepdad was a drug dealer. He sold weed, nothing hard like coke or meth as far as I know. Skipping over the specifics on who got hit or why, toward the end of this chaotic, impactful night, my biological father came to pick me up. As I climbed into the back seat of his truck, I saw a tall, towering white figure at the edge of the house we lived in. Specifically, the part of the house my bedroom was located. I barely caught a glimpse of the figure before it disappeared behind the end of the house. I was positive I was seeing things. There was no way I legitimately saw a glowing figure over 20 foot tall so bluntly in the pitch black of dead night. I had to be imagining it. The experiences I had been through that night must have made my imagination run wild. My stepdad was forced to pull a gun on the men who were trespassing. After repeatedly asking them to leave and calling 911, my stepdad pulled his shotgun from the closet and turned it on the men he faced. I feel lucky that the situation turned out the way it did that night. My stepdad faced 2 armed men, stood his ground and protected me, my mother, and my younger stepsister from these 2 trespassers, who I might add were convicted felons recently released from prison. I can't make sense of the bright figure I spotted near my bedroom. Was it my guardian angel? I felt a sense of peace when I saw it. It didn't matter what had happened that night. After seeing the figure, I knew everything would be okay, and that I was lucky to walk away from this alive. Case notes, file number 134. Do you remember the show Supernatural? In it, Castiel and all angels are described as being dramatically larger than their host body. Perhaps there's a grain of truth to this. I wonder if this figure was present throughout the entire chaotic night. Maybe he helped infuse courage into your stepdad, who isn't the type of character you'd expect to have such loyalty and boldness. I'm just glad that you ended up being safe after all. Case file number 135, written by Sad Skelly. A nightly specter offering words sweet as nectar. My parents had me when they were in their early 20s, and they did not have their own place yet. When I was 4, they got married and we moved into our own house. But before that, I lived with my mom and grandparents, her parents. Since I was very young, I used to sleep in the master bedroom in a big bed sandwiched between my mom and my grandma. My grandpa used to sleep in the spare room. Not sure why my grandma slept with us. My grandparents had a great relationship. But anyways, I vividly remember an elderly woman with curly red hair and a green dress talking to me every night. She would appear after my mom turned off all the lights and told me to sleep. This lady used to tell me to be quiet and not make any noise because my grandma and mom are very tired and they need to go to sleep so they can take care of me tomorrow. She was always nice to me. She kept me in check and made sure I didn't annoy my mom and Nan or wake them up. Sometimes she would even sing to me. I was always in my own little world when she was talking to me, like she demanded all of my attention. My mom confirms that I used to tell her that I saw the woman with the red hair again last night. She was a bit freaked out, but she assumed it was my own imagination, and when I grew up and still visited my grandmother, I stopped seeing her. I lived with my grandma for a few months after my grandpa died, but nothing unusual happened. But at 16, I was doing my A-levels, and one time my mom came with me to the art A-level to make sure I didn't get lost finding the school it was going to be held in. There was this other girl who had been in my secondary school doing the exact same exam, and her father had driven her there. My mom and her dad recognized each other, and doing small talk, she was asking where they live. He told her that they live in the same village my grandma lived in, and my mom told him the specific block of flats as he lived very close. He told her that people say they see a woman with curly red hair there, and paranormal stuff happens frequently. The description matched the lady I used to see as a kid, so that really freaked me out for a while. Case notes, file number 135. It isn't always that a lost soul remains pure and kind of heart after they pass away. Strikes me as her being lonely, but not wanting to cause harm, just wanting a bit of human connection, and offered you kind words hoping you wouldn't get scared. This is honestly touching. Case file number 136, written by In Denial Prophet. Triangles in the sky, discombobulating the mind into cream pie. Whether you choose to believe my encounter, that's up to you. I'm only sharing it because it's impossible to talk to friends or family about it. I have much better things to do than post fairy tales online. I'm just here to share my story without the fear of ridicule. The opinions of online trolls don't bother me in the least. My friends and family thinking I've gone crazy does. So here goes. I was out jogging in the middle of the afternoon one day. Beautiful day, no clouds, blue sky, maybe 75 degrees out. As I was jogging, a huge red flash appeared in the sky. It was so bright it made my eyes flinch. When I looked up, I was looking up at something completely unknown to me. I assumed I would know a UFO if I ever saw one. I could literally feel my brain trying to tell my eyes what I was looking at and just not being able to. I'd say it took about 15 to 20 seconds before I realized a massive, beige-colored triangular aircraft was just above the trees just up in front of me. It was surrounded by 3 balls of light. 2 balls of light were behind the aircraft and 1 out in front. Strangely, also in a triangle pattern. They were so bright I couldn't see any shape. They looked as bright as stars. I could see just what appeared to be super shiny metal, but no shape. I'm not convinced it was metal either. It was comparable to staring at the sun. That's how bright the balls of light were. The beige triangle was probably the length of 2 or 3 passenger airliners, completely silent. It was very thick too, like a few stories high. The top of the triangle had what I could best describe as a boiling cloud around the top of it, similar to boiling water, but a cloud boiling instead of water. It was very strange. The bottom of the triangle had 3 massive lights, 2 red and 1 white. They began rotating in sequence. The red one would come on, get super bright, dim out, then the next red one came on and did the same thing, followed by the white light. It repeated that sequence the entire time. What had me mesmerized was that this wasn't light from light bulbs. This was like starlight or something. I remember just thinking I need to run up directly under it and look at where the light is coming from. They weren't bulbs or anything. The bottom looked like it had open voids where the light was coming out from. It was very strange. Now here's where the story takes a hard left. As I was standing there, I suddenly noticed all sound was gone. I didn't hear any of the traffic or anything. I also noticed the green grass and blue sky seemed more vibrant, just a different shade, I guess. I also felt like I was standing 3 feet in the air, even though I was definitely on the ground. Like standing on a pitcher's mound is the best way I can describe it. I remember seeing a man on a bicycle coming from behind me towards the aircraft. I went to yell at him to get him to look up, but it seemed like he was so far away, yelling was pointless, even though it looked to me like he was 10 feet away. When I looked at him, he was in slow motion. He's on a bicycle, and it still took what felt like minutes for him to cover 30 to 50 yards. He also never seemed to see me or any of the UFOs. Then off to my left, further up in the sky, a second beige triangle literally appeared out of thin air, blinked all 3 lights at once, vanished, reappeared, flashed all 3 lights and then just vanished again. It didn't fly in and out, it appeared and disappeared. I can't describe to you why or how, but I know that thing flashed its lights at me. I can only describe a feeling of mutual acknowledgement to each other's presence. I know that sounds crazy. After that, I could hear sound again. The colors were back to normal. I was back on the ground. The 3 balls of light were gone, and the triangle began to slowly rise straight back up. It took maybe 5 to 7 minutes to get out of my view. I can remember seeing its light still rotating way up in the sky. The total encounter was 12 minutes. About maybe 200 yards away were 2 police vehicles, totally tinted out windows. They definitely weren't there when I first arrived in the area. I ran the other way. They never got out or chased me or anything. So believe what you want, but I know what the truth is, and I agree with the famous saying, humans are not ready for contact yet. This is much deeper than beings from other planets just visiting Earth. Thanks for letting me vent anonymously. Case notes, file number 136. So the triangular shape with 3 lights is one of the most commonly reported sightings of UFOs. And there was another story I read just this year of someone seeing one during the day too. Typically they're seen at night, but I think those are accidental sightings. In your case, it's almost as if they were testing you. You described it as the eyes or brain not being able to process what you were seeing. Honestly, this is probably way above our pay grades. Speculating, I think there are multiple alien species observing us, probing us in a non-sexual way, just trying to determine if any of us are ready to even perceive them. Time loss was involved too. I wonder what those cop cars were doing there. Perhaps someone called them in due to, from their perspective, You were just standing in the middle of the road staring up at the sky. The author responded to my comment saying, I assume someone called the cops because I was standing there for what I assumed was 12 minutes. If you saw me standing there, you definitely saw the massive triangle and balls of light in front of me. Also, those lights were so bright, if you flew at it at night, those red lights would be seen by everyone. After encountering what I saw, there's no way people are ready. The incident is something I think about every day. I can't imagine if everyone went through what I did. It's a very ominous feeling and experience. Case file number 137, written by Annie S.J. D.J. S.I. A vision of a deer prevented a human smear. So, last night, I was driving on a lonely road through the woods to my parents' house. It wasn't the same road I take usually, because there's some construction work going on at the moment. I got a lot of déjà vus in the past, but this time was different. Suddenly, this thought came to my head like a thunderbolt, that a deer would cross the road, and I hit it with my car. I even saw the deer literally landing on my windshield, completely shattering, covering everything in blood, etc. After this, I immediately started to slow down, from maybe around 60 miles per hour to 10 or 20. Maybe 10 seconds after this, the exact same deer ran across the road, nearly striking my car. If I hadn't have slowed down, I would definitely have crashed into it. Like I already said, I usually never take this road, so I had no chance to know that there are deers or anything. I also never had an encounter with an animal while driving my car before. They are pretty rare in this region. I usually don't believe in supernatural stuff, but this encounter really left me baffled. Case notes, file number 137. It's a classic case of foresight ability, manifested from future knowledge of impending disaster. My guess is this is innate to you, and should you always heed the warnings you get from it, you'll be protected from almost any danger. I think we all receive future knowledge, or at least knowledge of potential future scenarios. It's just that we aren't all equipped with the hardware to decode and translate this information into a visual spectrum. I think it's too much for most people to process, so our brains block it out as noise. Also, if anyone hasn't seen it yet, go watch the movie Next with Nicolas Cage. Okay, it's a guilty pleasure. I love Nicolas Cage movies, and it does fit the theme of this story. Case file number 138, written by Hammy T42. A falling date that dictated fate. Yeah, I think this may have been my first glitch in the Matrix, and I'm really still freaked out about it. So basically, I was in the kitchen, getting something from the fridge, when my dad out of nowhere asks, "Hey, what just dropped?" I'm confused because I didn't hear anything fall, so I ask him what he means. He says he definitely heard something fall, and asked me what it was. I'm still trying to figure out what he was talking about, when suddenly, a date pit goes flying off the kitchen counter right in front of me. I literally saw the full event unfold. It flew off the kitchen counter and landed on the ground right at my feet. I'm really weirded out by the whole situation. Not sure I can think of a reasonable explanation for how my dad randomly predicted something falling off the counter just to see it happen a few seconds after. Edit. Okay, so seeing the amount of responses I've gotten on this post, I'd like to clarify some things. 1. I was alone in the kitchen when this happened. Dad was in the living room, which is directly across from the kitchen. He was facing the other way watching TV. There was a box of dates, but they were on a separate shelf. It's an island kitchen, so there's one countertop shelf in the middle, and the box of dates were on the outside shelves. 2. It was a single pit from a date, which randomly popped into existence. It wasn't on the counter before because I wiped some crumbs off the countertop, and I would have knocked it off if it was there to begin with. 3. When I say popped into existence, I really do mean it. I saw it jump off the shelf, and I tracked its motion until it hit the floor. Case notes, file number 138. So has this ability ever manifested itself for your dad before? The date pit appeared from nowhere, so it's not just foresight, predicting a future event. Your dad saw a potential future, but by interacting with the past differently than how he saw it in his vision of said future, it prevented you from eating a date and placing the pit on the counter, which you then would accidentally have knocked over, again, in that potential future. So in a nutshell, by seeing it, he changed that vision of the future. But then how did the pit come to be in the original timeline when you never ate the date? Trippy. Case file number 139, written by Roward 62867. Brothers bonded by strife, suddenly given closure from the afterlife. My brother Kenny and I were always close. He was a little over a year older than me. He and I were adopted as babies. Our mother had tuberculosis but died in a car crash. We were the only children she had. We are also of the Northern Arapaho tribe. We were adopted by a white family and taken away from the reservation. We grew up not knowing about our culture and our language. Also, growing up in a white world, away from the reservation, we always felt a bit lost. We never saw ourselves as different from everyone else, but sadly, everyone else saw us different from them. We never really talked about it, but it always was there. I'm happy to say that I am back with the Arapaho people, and I've learned my culture and I'm learning my language too, hard as it may be, but I digress. Despite being very close, we also fought a lot, maybe more than most brothers do. I can remember having some really good knockdown dragouts with him as kids. As we grew into adulthood, we had a few more fights, but it ended after we both joined the military. I was in the Army and he was in the Marine Corps. I suppose being in uniform matured us and we became much closer. A friendship developed between us that I can't really explain. I imagine other siblings who read this will understand what I'm talking about. Desert Storm came along and the whole world was watching. Kenny was deployed to Kuwait and I was waiting for my orders to go. I was in Germany at that time and he was in San Diego. He was a combat engineer. I was in field artillery, but assigned to a headquarters battery, working in brigade operations at that time. I was taken away from that and assigned to do guard duty for civilian housing there in Augsburg. It was January in Germany, so it was very cold. Standing for 12 hours at a time in the snow took a toll on me and I ended up with trench foot and later on, a condition known as cellulitis, a blood infection that was slowly killing me. Even still, my first sergeant came to visit me and handed me orders for the desert. I spent many weeks in the hospital. My doctor's name, ironically, was Major Burden. When my feet healed, I was discharged and the war was already winding down. Luckily, I didn't have to go. My brother did though, and he came back a shattered man. Before the war, he was training to be a marathon runner, and he had even carried the Olympic torch in the late 80s before joining the Marine Corps. Now he could barely walk across the room without wheezing. That war had destroyed him. He began drinking very heavily. Sometimes he drank so much, I thought it would kill him. But it didn't. It went on for years and we all tried to help him get over it, but he just couldn't. He would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. Sometimes he would take off walking and be gone for days. One day, he finally went to the VA hospital and entered a rehab program. I was so happy to see that he was finally getting help. He stuck with it until just a few days shy of graduating. Then he left. The hospital called and called, trying in vain to get him to come back and finish the program, but he didn't. He felt he was on the road to recovery, and he did very well with sobriety for a long time. Then, just like that, he started drinking again. This time it was much worse than before. He couldn't hold down a job, and all of us in the family did what we could to help him, but to no avail. All we could do was watch him drink himself to death. Even though he wasn't working, he'd still find ways of getting alcohol. One night he was out with two men. I won't call them friends because he hardly knew them. They were driving on a country road in the northeast part of Wyoming. Their truck broke down, and according to these two dickheads, Kenny went to find help. Kenny was found the next morning, face down in the snow with his hands in his pockets, 14 miles off the nearest road, dead from below freezing temperatures and exposure. I was still in the Army at the time. I was on a field exercise when I got word. I came straight home and the bottom fell out of my world. I was devastated beyond belief. I prayed to God for me to switch places with him, but it never happened. I had a hell of a time getting back on track with my life. The closest relative I ever had was now gone, and I had never felt so alone. Weeks turned into months and then to years. I got out of the Army and I had moved from house to house, finally settling into a little 2-bedroom apartment. I had a decent job, and I was making enough money to get a phone hooked up in my house. I lived in that apartment for a few months. The hours at my job were 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., so when I got home, I was usually up until the wee hours of the morning. One night, I was up late watching movies. I fell asleep in my recliner. It was summertime, and my window was open right next to me. It was nice and cool at that time of night. At around 3:30 a.m., my phone started ringing. To hell with that, I said. I was just going to let it ring until whomever it was gave up. It kept ringing and ringing. Finally, I picked it up and impatiently said, "Hello?" There was no response from the other end. I could hear that someone was there, though. I could also hear people talking like they were on the other side of the room. "Hello?" Still nothing. I was about to hang up, and a voice on the other end said, "Ronnie?" Again, I said, "Hello? Who is this?" The voice on the other end said, "I can't talk long." Then it fucking hit me. This was Kenny. I recognized his voice and I sat up in my chair, fully awake. "Kenny? What the hell? Where are you?" "Everything is okay," he said. "Where are you?" I asked again. Then he said, "Gotta go." And that was it. The phone didn't hang up. I didn't hear it click. Unfortunately, this was before the days of caller ID. I could still hear the voices on the other end of the line, on the other side of whatever room he called me from. I swore to myself that I wasn't going to hang up until I got some answers. Nobody ever came back on the line, though. I just sat there, yelling his name over and over until the sun came up. Finally, the battery in the cordless phone went dead, and that was the end of the call. I sat back in my chair and cried for a very long time. Then I fell asleep until it was time to get up and go to work. I felt better after that. I felt like there was some finality to the loss and destitution that I had been feeling since his death. I can talk about Kenny now with gladness. I can think about the good times I had with him and smile. I named my first son after him, and my brother's portrait hangs in my living room, looking across the room at my son's portrait on the wall across from his. I miss him, but I know I'll see him again someday. I am so thankful that he was my brother. Case notes, file number 139. Truly, I'm sorry for your loss. It's just heartbreaking. He was brutalized by a war that sapped the life from him. Recovering from that is often not possible. But then a little dose of humor from the Major Burden. Damn, what a name. I've heard it a few times now. When loved ones get a call from a deceased loved one, there are always additional background voices. I'm so glad Kenny was able to give you the closure that you desperately needed. The author responded to my comment, saying, "Yes, I can remember when she came into my room and introduced herself to me. She just told me her first name. A lot of army doctors aren't as concerned with rank structure and are pretty informal, especially when dealing with a potential terminal patient. She started explaining what cellulitis is and what it was doing to me. The infection was bad enough that it had gotten into my bloodstream and was getting into my organs. During this conversation, I noticed the rank in her nameplate, then it hit me. Her name is Major Burden. I mentioned it to her and she laughed and said, it takes a while, but most patients usually make the connection sooner or later. She came to check on me every day and would sit and visit for 20 minutes or so. I was in the hospital for several weeks. I remember when she came in and told me that the swelling wasn't going down in my feet, the antibiotics weren't working, and that if I had any arrangements that needed to be made, then I should do it while I was still conscious. It was scary. I was only 21 at the time. Case file number 140, written by Christoph Victorson. Money and Time, a repeating numerical sequence of the sublime. I've had maybe 24 encounters over the past 25 years that I'm at a total loss to explain, but this post isn't about those. It's about the number 1111 that seems to keep appearing around the same time I have an encounter, before and after, usually for several days up to about a week. Realistically, how many times can you expect to see the number 1111 in a day? Maybe twice if you check the time often. But I seem to have days or weeks when the number is everywhere. I could see it maybe 10 times or more in a day. Some recent examples are twice a day on a clock, obviously. I buy some things at a store and the total is £11.11, or maybe my change is £11.11. I ask someone's number and 1111 is in there. I put a stopwatch on to time the exercises, and I stop it by chance on 11 minutes 11 seconds. I hang up a call and realize it lasted 11 minutes and 11 seconds. Some of the events are quite improbable. Today my computer screen froze at 11:11, and the time was stuck there for a few minutes until I gave up and rebooted. The other day a dude in the street asked me for the time, and it was 11:11. I must have looked like a psycho because I pulled my phone out, saw the time, and just walked off without answering him. I mean, who even asks strangers for the time anymore? It's been years since I was last asked. In the past, the number has always coincided with me seeing or hearing something that I can't explain, and since over the last few days, 11:11 is popping up everywhere. Again, I imagine it's just a matter of time. Maybe I'll post once more if something else happens. Does anyone else see 11:11 or any other sequence of numbers all the time? Any theories on what it means? Up until the last few days, I hadn't seen 11:11 more frequently than any other sequence of numbers for 5 or so years, and then suddenly they're everywhere. Case notes, file number 140. I have seen my share of the number 11:11, mostly while looking at the time. Some might say it's synchronicity, and others might attribute it to the mind, powerful as it is, attuned to a specific focus, and then detecting only that sequence. For instance, you never notice how many people have silver Hondas until you think about it once, and then they seem to be everywhere. Actually, the fact someone asks you for the time is one of the most notable elements here. I think you're sort of a beacon, almost like a lightning rod drawing in energy from areas and people. I bet the person who asked you for the time gave off a powerful vibe, didn't he? It wouldn't surprise me. Case file number 141, written by Haskelod. Is the future written in stone? Rest assured for her, it is known. I'll preface this, as many here have, by clarifying that I am by no means a spiritual person, and having said that, I have no way to describe what happened to us. Back in 2019, my girlfriend experienced a memory of a situation that had not happened yet. We were both in my bedroom, in my house, and she was on the sofa trying to recall about a funny remark I had made to her. She says that she was reading something funny to me a few days prior, to which I replied with a funny remark, and she was telling me this because she couldn't quite make out what I had said. I was confused because I had no recollection of that conversation. We dwelled on it for quite some time, while she tried to remind me that I was by the bathroom door while she was laying down on the bed, but I had nothing. She eventually shrugged it off and forgot about it. Fast forward to a couple days after, I had just showered and I was drying myself off by the bathroom door frame, which is inside my bedroom. She is laying on my bed, reading something funny on her cell phone, right in front of me. She starts reading it back to me with an excited look. As she is reading it, her excitement seems to slowly fade away. I take my cue, and I start to make a funny remark about that story, but I stopped halfway. I ask her, "What's wrong?" She is pale, wide-eyed looking at the phone screen. When it suddenly clicked, she looks back to me, jumps out of bed, and finishes a sentence I had just started. She knew exactly what I was going to say. It was exactly the memory she had 2 days prior. We spent a few good hours after the incident freaking out, trying to wrap our heads around what had just happened. There's no possible explanation, no déjà vu. She literally described that event days before it happened. I remember her mentioning specific sections of that story the day before. It wasn't a coincidence, a text that she read again by mistake, nor could it be me unconsciously playing a prank on her. It was really a memory of the future. Update. She came over last night. She confirmed some things. The text she read was from a tattoo on a photo, on Instagram or Facebook most likely. She distinctly remembered bits of the text on the moment of the memory, as well as a certain movement I did, followed by something I said. However, at the moment she actually read the text back to me, she definitely had never seen the tattoo before. And then she felt a weird sensation, as if the memory was rebuilding itself. When she looked at me, she said it felt like her memory and her sight sort of converged into a single moment. That's when I asked her if she was okay. Then she got out of bed. She repeated what I had just said before asking, and completed with a punchline, but the remark had no impact at all. She said she had never felt so afraid before because the feeling was too strange to even describe. I'm obviously very skeptical myself, so I confronted her about it, asking if it was possible that she just saw the same image twice, if it could have been just a coincidence, or if she actually just had a very strong déjà vu at the moment and the memory wasn't actually related. She denied all of it and said that she was sure of the text when it first came to her mind, and she knew exactly what I was going to do and say. Her family has a history of dealing with supernatural stuff, and she has quite some memories about talking to angels with her aunts when she was young. She has also been told once, totally out of the blue, by a friend's mother that she had mediunic powers. The friend's mother was a medium as well. We might after all just be in a Jeremy Boremy. Case notes, file number 141. You know, honestly, I'm a little envious. This is basically a superpower. It's truly a miraculous ability, although also understandable to be genuinely unsettled by it. It's so simple yet extraordinary, you doubt your sanity, even collectively between the both of you, yeah? My gut tells me that this will be triggered for her again in some way. She'll have visions again, and you'll both be stunned as how is this happening? How is this even possible? Well, I think the information is there, it's just that some people are able to interpret it, and then they get these visions of the future. But one important note is, that future isn't certain. There's always variables, so just by seeing it, you change it. Or you can. It may still come to pass, you may still not believe the vision and act as you normally would have. Nothing major changes and the vision still comes to pass. And the other factor to that is, the further away the vision is, the more uncertainty there is. So if you're seeing something in a year later, the odds are it's not going to come to pass, nowhere near like the vision. There are too many variables that will change. Like, if you get enough dominoes in a certain path and you change even one or two, well, it's not going to go in the same place. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, and leave any thoughts you might have down below. I always like knowing what you guys think too.